Five, four, three, two. Hello and welcome to Life in the Foam. My name is Clinton and I'm joined today by Donald for this, our third episode. Our topic this week, social media.
Cringe now.
Hey Donald, welcome to the show. Welcome
Thank
back, I
you.
should say.
We all have opinions about social media, so I'm sure this is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent.
I joined Facebook in like 2005, I guess, 2006, when it was still just a university only sort of service. I was at Carleton University at the time, so I needed that account. And then remember when the apocalypse came and everything got opened up to everybody, and suddenly your parents could see everything that was going on.
Yeah, I got on there for the first time too. So I was on MySpace prior to that. Did you go that route too? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
So MySpace prior to that, which was, in hindsight, like very simple compared to what we have now. And then I got on Facebook with university accounts. Uh, hung out there for a bit, didn't get too much into it. But then, like you said, they opened the floodgates when they made it available to the public, and that was the beginning of the end, right? So grandma was on there, and they started getting all the super addictive games, like click on stuff, Mafia Wars, and
Farmville or
or
whatever.
Farmville, yeah, Farmville, all the Zynga games, right?
Yeah.
Just anything to keep the site sticky, and they kept. I'm sure they were learning as they were going, just figuring out how to make it more and more sticky. And in the beginning, it was I was super stuck on it. So just tracking people down I hadn't seen in 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Definitely made some old connections, and it felt very powerful at the time because it was the first real platform that everybody got on. So just multi-generational.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because the floodgates, that's a replay of Eternal September, which was back in 1993 when the World Wide Web exploded and suddenly everyone who was online from the 80s and 90s who learned how to play by the rules were suddenly deluged and flooded with all the noobs who ruined
Mm-hmm.
all of the order and all of the discipline and all the polite manners and whatnot. I mean, this is just an event that happens over and over. It has been happening for decades, right? I mean,
Yeah, normal people ruin everything for us nerds. It's just
yeah, that's the
it's
story.
how it works. We carve out our own little utopia, and then everybody else wants to come in too. And
Yeah,
all right, we
yeah.
try to be nice about it, and then everything gets ruined.
Yeah, and that's what social media is with smartphones. As soon as Steve Jobs put the computer in everyone's pocket and then told them to go nuts with apps and whatnot, then now we've been living in 10 years of that world, and isn't it fun?
Yeah. When's the last time you heard the word netiquette?
Netiquette. I think I'm the only guy who used it. I used it on the last episode with Harold, but I think I pulled that one out of a book I found. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
right here, Virtual Communities by Howard
Oh, okay,
Rheingold.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember. So I did the BBS thing prior to getting on the net, and then the BBS operator got a T1. Was it a T1 gateway? It might have been a T1 gateway. Anyway, it was a huge deal because T1's monstrous at the time,
Yeah.
1.54 megabit gateway to the internet, and then I think we were paying hourly to go out and do stuff on the net, and I don't even remember what we were doing. It's probably something we shouldn't have been doing, but it was amazing. And then Netcom came along locally and other ISPs and made it really super easy for everybody to get on. So got in through the dial-up and all that. So it's like, oh, I don't need telex anymore. Now I can bust out Trumpet Windsock and have my four page script to get my modem to talk to a ISP and
Yeah.
go look at nothing because really there was not that much content back then.
Yeah.
It was more,
I know.
welcome to my homepage, best viewed through Netscape Navigator,
Oh, yeah.
and that
Made in Notepad, right?
kind of stuff.
Yeah. There was yeah. So just for some background, what you're talking about when you say BBS, it's just everyone using their modem to directly connect their computers locally and whatnot. But
Mhm.
the infrastructure of the internet, packet switching, it's this big complex thing involving Ethernet and IP addresses, and that was something that actually connected the world. So you were logging onto your local thing, which then was like a gateway to get onto the internet very indirectly. So it's like you
Right.
can so you could connect to say like the computer downtown and have an email sitting there for it to get sent out in the real internet and then come back there and then get relayed back to you, right? All these
Right.
steps between you and the greater packet switching internet. Now we're all directly on the internet. There are no more local network in betweens anymore, for the most part.
Yeah, or not any that we have to think about anyway.
Yeah.
And that's from a user experience perspective. That's what matters.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you don't need your trumpet windsock script anymore. When I was a kid, I worked at an ISP, helping people get online back then, and it was like, okay, go to line whatever and file and make sure it says this and that, and you've got people basically computer illiterate for the most part that you're trying to walk through this stuff, and it was a nightmare. And now it's especially with Windows 10, like we were just talking about before you started recording, it's take this home, click the little antenna thing in the corner, connect it to your Wi-Fi, just type the password in, and then that's it. You're on, and every single app that you could put on your computer is just going to work.
yeah. I'm like,
So you didn't have to mess with settings the way you used to.
am I some sort of like masochist for actually wanting to have to mess with settings so that I know what it is that I'm actually doing, right? Because everything, like we said, it's getting easier and easier and easier, and that's how this technology spreads more and more and more. And now everyone is on social media, and it's like your phone is like this very thin little window to connect you to your friends. But when I started using computers 20 years ago, the computer was not just, well, it was physically bigger, right? But it's also, there was so much crap you had to set up and do on your own and get through the interface and do all the settings. You knew inside and out what was going on. By removing that, people tend to not even notice that, they're on the internet. They're not just using the next version of, the direct telephone line like they had been using previously.
No, they're always on the internet too, and that's where we start getting into the scary parts. Whether we're talking about social media or mobile devices as a whole, is that if this is just sitting on my desk, there's data constantly going back and forth between the vendor for every app I have installed, to Google itself, to the telco, the cell phone provider. Everybody's just scraping all of your info. And then that gets forked out to the intelligence communities. So it's not just for ads. It's they know what you're doing, right? And the location data is attached to everything. And it used to be, so I use Android phones. I tried using iOS once. It was terrible for me. And I remember back ice cream bar, whatever the hell, the ice cream sandwich release of Android, I think was the last one I used, where if you turned off location, it pretty much stayed off after updates. Now I notice, especially this is a Chinese phone that I'm using, anytime there's an update, or even if it just sits for a while, the location option flips back on by itself. Weird. So yeah.
Every time I open Google Maps, it prompts me, hey, you should turn on your GPS.
Right.
And then I have to hit cancel, which kind of is like a head fake, because you think you're going to cancel, it's going to like close the app or something, right? Like there's all these little intuitive tricks that just,
Well, it's partially it's by design. So it's by design. It's for user experience, and it's also to collect the maximum amount of data possible.
Oh sure, which keeps it free, right? That's how you're paying for it, is by
Exactly.
Ostensibly, that's the agreement, right?
Yeah, I forget if it was The Last Psychiatrist or what. Somebody said somewhere, I think it might have actually been him, that if you're not paying for the product, you are the product. So, and we're productized, and it all comes. What's interesting is that data. When I started with this mess way back when, everybody was super paranoid, like tinfoil hat level paranoia of like, I'm not sharing this data. I'm not putting credit card information on the internet. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, everyone was a nerd, and they immediately understood the complications, right?
Right. We knew the dangers.
Yeah.
We knew the dangers. We were like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And then I think, between the credit card companies figuring out how to address fraud better, having better policies in place for you not being liable for fraudulent charges, coupled with the e-commerce thing kind of rising up the first time, the first .com bubble, all made it okay at that point. And then now people don't even think about it. So we've got, everybody has their credit card number saved, and one-click purchase on Amazon, or with PayPal, just type your credentials tied to your card. So it's not how it used to be.
No, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I remember deleting my cookies after every browsing session just to make sure no one could track me what
Yes.
the heck I was doing on the internet. And now, social media, every single website has got some little widget on it that's
Hmm.
from Facebook and that's from Twitter, and those little buttons just on the page let Twitter and Facebook know that you were visiting that other website. And I'm sure people don't even realize this, right? Well,
It's actually deeper than that. So Facebook has what's called Facebook Pixel, that literally like through a pixel tracks your activity across multiple websites. So that could be happening even if you don't see that little Facebook logo, because there's incentives for people to include that in their page, similar to like Google Analytics putting that in your page, right? So
yeah.
it's just a little chunk of code that you put on your web page and gathers all kinds of information.
Full disclosure, if you go to clintonthegeek.com, I'm running Google Analytics because it was easy and I set it up.
That's why everybody else runs it.
Yep, exactly, exactly.
Yep. It actually started as what was that called? Was it Blowfish or something? It had a fish as a logo. It was a web analytics company that Google purchased and turned into Google Analytics.
Oh,
Uh,
of course.
I'm sure the original product's long gone from the code, but yeah, that's not even something they developed. They kind of saw the potential there and purchased some company. Excuse me. So yeah,
Well, that brings us to the nature of all these social media sites as large for-profit corporations, which I mean,
right.
of course, Alphabet, which is Google, or Apple. I mean, they'll buy up startups that do interesting things. Like I remember when Google bought Songs a few years ago. Songs, that was a fantastic site full of all these curated songs that would fit a mood or whatever. And they bought it and they ruined it, right? And it's like they don't have to use the things they bought. They can just buy out competition or anything that is threatening, or they can use it or they can not use it, right? So
Right.
it's just the nature of corporations as conglomerates to just chew up all the little guys is kind of a new dynamic of social media, which is sort of what has allowed them, especially also through the corridors of app stores. The fact that people are taught you buy a phone and then you go to the app store or you go to the Play Store and then you pick from the top 10 things everyone else uses, right? It's just a small little channel that narrows cyberspace down to all these big players which have paid for their
Right.
positions or whatnot, and they get mentioned in media. So it's like, okay, we had the internet and everyone was like self-dependent and security conscious and every person for themselves, and then we got smartphones and now we got this little curated special corporate thing where it's more like a business where if something goes wrong you can talk to the manager and demands a refund or something, which is totally not how cyber communities have traditionally worked, right?
Right.
I know there's like a friction between that. I think a lot of the anarchy and the trolling and whatnot just comes from this harsh collision between the culture of it's my computer and I do what I want and I'm on the internet and that means everything versus like this platform has an obligation to give me the best experience, sort of.
Right. Right. Yeah. Well, so the movement to a free platform, people have that expectation of, well, it's free, I should be able to do what I want, free speech, all of that. And it's like, well, it's not a public sidewalk, right? But that's the big debate that's happening right now is speech. And we're seeing with Alex Jones being the perfect example that the social media companies are functioning together as a cartel. And that's scary, right? So it was interesting that Twitter was actually the last banning him. But it seemed pretty obvious to me that, I'm assuming executives at each company talked to each other and said, let's kind of do this in concert, because the way that it happened, between Apple and YouTube kind of happening almost simultaneously, it was, it was like, okay, because I think one of them alone would have been afraid to do it. But if you could get two or three of them together and then the rest, follow suit from that, because everybody follows what the big guys do. And that's a little scary to me.
Yeah, it was like,
So
we do it and then we suffer the blowback of the outrage, but now it's normalized and now it's a thing and people
exactly,
expect it to
that's
happen.
exactly it. Yeah, it becomes normalized and then people get used to it. Just like now it's normalized for everybody to willingly give up all their personal information on Facebook.
Yeah.
And we were talking a little last night about some of the things people post, like, oh yeah, last night I was so high, or criminals get caught. They're like, yeah, I stuck up this, idiot at some liquor store. They end up getting busted, but they think that it's them and then their little audience, and that nobody else is listening, which is problematic. It's you know, it's the data's everywhere, right? So these companies are taking our information, figuring out everything that they can about us from it, purchasing habits. I remember probably 5 or 6 years ago reading about the data mining that Target does. Target, retail chain. I don't know if they have those in Canada. Kind of like Walmart, a little bit more like scale Walmart.
Yeah.
As a comparison.
They tried up here for a few years and it bombed. Yeah.
Didn't work.
No.
Yeah. Didn't take. They're able to predict what you're going to buy before you know what you're going to buy, because they have enough data on you. And people aren't sitting around creating data points of, oh, well, Tuesday, August 2nd, I bought, a 2-gallon bottle of Tide, to wash clothes. And then a month and a half later, I did the same thing, and then to see the pattern develop and all that stuff. But they have that, right? So they started using that to say, okay, a few days prior to when we know Don's might go buy some Tide, let's send him a coupon to make sure he buys the Tide at Target. And that was the beginning. That really opened my eyes. Gosh, and the grocery stores with the little key tags and all that stuff. And yeah, I know we're talking about social media, but really, it's all one and the same. It's about data collection, and they're nice enough to give you a little platform you can chat with your friends, but that's not what it's about, right? It actually is more sinister than especially if you look at guys like Zuckerberg, who I think that you probably never hear him say it publicly now, but I'm pretty sure he views most of us as cattle. Even to the point of, there's the famous quote when he was back at his Harvard dorm room creating Facebook, to the effect of, "I can't believe these dumb fucks give me all of their data."
Yeah.
And I doubt he's outgrown that idea. Maybe it's matured a little bit, or he's taken the rough edges around it.
Yeah, I mean, if you take at face value all of the good intentions that are espoused as the noble goal of Facebook. Oh, we want to connect the world one at a time. We want to bring everyone together, right? You can just look at that as it's on the face of it and say, what good is it to just take a whole bunch of people and cram them all together in an ever tighter elevator, right? And not hey, let's cram the whole world into a psychic sardine can, and you don't expect some friction to go on there. And I mean, there is
none of that was considered. It was. Let's build a website that people can put up their information if they're stupid enough to, according to Zuckerberg, and get it sticky and, turn into kind of an experiment. But then it was like, well, we can monetize the thing. And then it became about the money.
Yeah.
And it's bad. It's one of, I worry too about a larger problem across science and technology, that just because we can do something, we need to stop for a moment and ask ourselves, should we be doing this? And we don't do that. And very often it's because the people that are discovering these things and creating these things, it's more of a personal challenge to see. It's like, oh, can we actually do this?
Oh, sure.
And the challenge of that, and not to stop to say, maybe we shouldn't fiddle with certain things.
Well, what you, when you said cattle, right, that's, my way of looking at that is the idea of data points, of looking at all these consumers out there in the world who are using these products as something to be kind of experimented on, and that's what it is. Here's control group A and control group B, so let's send this side to this people and this side to this people and see how these people change their actions in their lives, right? And that's how all this stuff develops slowly, is actual live testing in the field, and you get into Facebook. There was a big ethical controversy over Facebook trying to measure people's emotions and their control group for people who are sad all the time versus people who are happy all the time. It's these are people out there in the world living their lives being manipulated by some corporation subliminally as part of an experiment. That's
our brains cannot process people on that scale.
Yeah.
It's like the quote from was it Stalin, a million deaths is a statistic or whatever it is, because we're not actually capable physiologically of really comprehending. I think we cap out at, I'm trying to remember from the literature, but I think it's about 30 people roughly that we're able to really have a true connection with. And then after that, it's just faces and names. And then beyond that, it's some guy on the other side of the world, just zero effect to me. So when you're dealing with data at that scale, I mean, I work at a company that does financial data analytics, assigns scores, et cetera, to people's credits, FICO. We're global, but in the U.S. we're best known for our credit scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, we're completely guilty of that. Absolutely, it's we're enabling people to have a grade, score assigned to them to help enable them to get credit, but we are reducing them down to that score for financial purposes, which we can argue ethically if there's an issue with that.
Mm-hmm.
We're long gone from the day where the farmer would go to the bank and talk to the bank manager to get the loan against the farm. There's a population element that ties into all this too, that I think enables a lot of the problems that we see on Facebook. So Facebook itself, it's like, is that platform necessarily bad on its own? No, but it does go back to what you're talking. How many billion people? A couple billion, 2-3 billion, I think that they have on there, and stick them in close proximity digitally. Same thing on Twitter. Twitter's even more toxic, but bad things happen.
Yeah.
So it's diversity in that sense doesn't work.
Yeah, not when the communication's so narrow between text and tweets, especially if we move on to Twitter.
Right.
Telegraph messages.
Yeah, it really is telegraph messages. It really is. And like Neil Postman talks about, how can you have a conversation over that platform with that concept of the news of the day? Basically, one sentence blurbs. Twitter's expanded it now, so you can type a little bit more, but it's effectively the same. I mean, 280 characters. You can't convey any critical thinking, any kind of complex thought, any kind of legitimate communications, really, in that short of a block of characters. And so the platform itself, getting into Marshall McLuhan, the platform itself is dictating the terms in which we communicate with each other. And I think that's trickling over into the real world also. But that limitation is destroying conversation. And that bleeds even outside of Twitter and Facebook. And that our conversation's been reduced still down to Twitter/Facebook level conversation, just like prior to that, it was through television, the sound bites when you watch especially cable news, and it's people arguing, and somebody gets 2 or 3 words and another person gets 2 or 3 words, and everybody's fighting to get those couple witty words in, so they get the win for the argument when they do panels and whatnot. It's not a real conversation like you had back with, say, the McNeil-Lear Hour or Firing Line with William F. Buckley. That we would never see that now. It's like William F. Buckley, hard conservative, would have the most liberal people come on the show, and they would just sit there and so point and have those conversations, and generally not, except for Gore Vidal, but generally not result in like yelling at each other and interrupting too much. The long format, right? And we're seeing that come back a little bit on YouTube. People are watching Joe Rogan, 3-hour shows, that long format, but it's still the dominant is still the short format social media stuff. And I think that your average person, they're going to stay with that too. I think that there are thinking people that are interested in a longer format method of communications because they realize that this other way of trying to communicate with one another is problematic. Yeah.
All right, so we've kind of covered the hidden ground of like why I was very much a latecomer to social media. I had an account, I barely used it. I felt icky with all this technical and privacy implications that most people didn't. You're gonna go read the terms of service and the privacy policy that's 27 pages long, right?
Yeah.
No, like the host on CNN told you to join Twitter and go send them a tweet. So that's just what you do. You just buy your fun new phone that Steve Jobs promised you was awesome, right? And this is your first time on the internet, and this is going to be the state for most people. And also there's 15-year-olds out there who have never known a world any different, and what the internet is to them is Instagram, WhatsApp, all this stuff, right? Discord. So
yeah, and they're literally if you want to equate for the younger kids what these are, it's the hallway at high school between classes. That's what these platforms are, right? Because that's where you do your preening and your posturing and your real world social networking. And that's to me, it's an extension of that, which is interesting too, because adult communications are basically introduced to the kind of silly stuff you might say as a kid to one another, and it lends itself, I think, pretty well actually to have a really immature level of communication.
Well, there you go. Let's see.
Works out well.
Was it End of Childhood? Neil Postman's The End of Childhood, the book.
End of Education.
Oh, The End of Education. The whole book was about kids are forced to grow up early, but then they don't grow up all the way.
That was covered in End of Education too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just this idea of, I mean, especially when we have these phones and the interface is changing every 6 months. It's like, oh look, Facebook has a wall. Oh, now Facebook doesn't have a wall anymore. Now they've got this other thing, right? Just people are just getting trained to get used to their phone being an ever-changing, ever-manipulating machine, and to them it's a very fast-paced, ever-moving. Man, technology changes so quickly nowadays. I can't keep up. I have to keep relearning things again and again and again.
Which is stupid because it's not. It might change forms where, like you said, the interface for your Android phone might update. I mean, these obviously were huge. This was a huge social change.
Yeah.
This, and then not that long after, these things came along, social media landed. So it's effectively a double clusterfuck of problematic platforms.
Yeah.
Because this thing is totally, the rats hitting the lever for cocaine, right in your hand, and then when what you're consuming is also that same thing, Twitter, Facebook, etc., where it's like they literally have psychologists on staff to figure out how do we make this sticky, how do we get people to feel good about using our platform, manipulating their mental health effectively.
Yeah.
That's a problem when you combine two things like that.
Yeah.
It's like somebody who's a drug addict, but then they find out if they can mix two drugs together, they get even higher.
Yeah.
It's a lot more dangerous, but it feels better too, I guess. Right?
In the past year, I guess, there's been lots of signaling, at least, from Silicon Valley about, we're going to start considering the ethical implications and advise people not to have screen time and give them the tools to guard their own behavior, right? Oh, we're going to let people use their phone to stop themselves from using their phone. So I guess Google's...
That's horseshit.
Well, yeah. Oh, okay, so you admit that the user has surrendered a part of their self-control to this machine, but now the machine's going to take better care of them for them, right?
Right.
It's just... That's what's being normalized in the mainstream media bubbles. That's why I live in the foam. That's why I'm making this podcast. I'm looking at this crap going, wow, I don't want any part of this, right?
And I think, and that's the thing is, I think you can use this technology without getting into that stuff, right? I mean, here we are. We're going to have, shooting for an hour-long conversation about this, long-form conversation, two people back and forth, hopefully some people watch it, and are like, oh, these guys, have some interesting points. This is good stuff. And take something away from it, but we don't fit that dopamine profile.
Yeah.
And if you look at, oh God, if you want to, I don't want to sound contrived by talking about the dopamine, and we'll just say the neurotransmitter type issues with this, and internet addiction, actually is a thing. We know it's a thing. We don't know about the full scope of it, but anything that can make you feel good, especially when you do it in excess, has the potential to be addicting. I mean, we live in a world where people actually go get spray paint cans, which isn't even a drug, spray it into like a bag or a sock, and then smell the fumes to get high. And it's like, no, you're not actually getting high. Like you're depriving your brain of oxygen, and it's freaking out, and you're breathing all these God knows what chemicals, but they still do it. So yeah, absolutely.
I remember Gold spray paint guy from who would always show up on
yes like with the seizure face, like half his face was kind of and with the gold around his mouth. He was big all over FARC back in the day, right? he was on FARC doing a lot of memes.
What was that site that posts people's mugshots?
Right.
Yeah.
That's a I think that's a pretty messed up phenomenon too, all the mugshot sites.
Yeah.
Like the smoking gun, I get, right?
Smoking
if you're a celebrity, if you're a celebrity or something and you get arrested, it's like, okay, that's fair game. But what these mugshot sites do, so again, similar to social media, they're taking publicly available data, quasi-publicly available data. They're getting the streams from the police departments and the correction systems, taking the photos, putting them online, so that way if Susie or Joe got arrested for a DUI and happens to have a mugshot, it's put in her name, his name, it's going to come up. And then if you're that person, you can then pay that company to remove the information from the net. And I'm like, that's blackmail. That's
That's
actually like that's extortion.
yeah, yeah. That's a dirty profit. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Very dirty profit.
And
And
it's not going anywhere, by the way. It was
no, it's
archived
not unless
already.
it gets legislated, right? Unless it gets legislated against something like that's not going to go anywhere because it is public information. They're just using it in a very nasty way.
Yeah.
Uh, it's nobody wants to be embarrassed like that.
No, no.
So
I mean, well, hell, that's another element of social media. Is first of all, you're basically told to use your own real identity, and I guess because I guess when I was a kid on the internet, all the safety warnings was never give away your name, never tell anyone where you live, never tell anyone who you are, be anonymous, or you'll be safe, or you'll get attacked, right? Um, and no, social media is completely antithetical to all of that. It's like, hey, go stand up and be yourself and represent yourself. And then when a whole bunch of shit gets thrown back at you, maybe one of our cyberbullying units will ban the person responsible for it. Like, it just seems so entirely. All of the bad things that could come of this were entirely predictable based on earlier online experiences, except that it seems like people who came up with smartphones didn't bother looking as to what the internet was. Like, I wonder if it's partly a semantics issue. We talk about platforms. Oh, this is a public platform, just like a utility. Like, social media is supposed to be equal to magazines and newspapers and television.
that's the argument. Well, no, that's the argument. Right? So, is social media a utility, or aka a public space where everybody gets a right to speak, or is it a platform that they're publishing?
Yeah.
Right. Because if it's a platform when they kick somebody like Alex Jones off, that behavior is reflective of something that is a platform. And if it's a platform, that's fine. But you have to say that this is a platform. This is not a free speech zone.
Neutral carrier.
And they're not.
Right?
They're not free speech zones. The problem is that socially these platforms are what what would have been the public square has turned into Twitter, Facebook, etc., YouTube. That is where discussion is now happening. So if these are publishers where this place is happening, the publishers are controlling speech, there is suppression of public speech happening. Because if and you can make the argument like Alex Jones still has his website that he can speak, whatever. It's like, yeah, but if that's not where the primary conversations are happening, he is being he's having his rights violated. It's really tricky though, because this problem has never happened in history before, where private companies have effectively taken over the role of something that was always a public thing, that was always assumed to be. You would go talk to people, the market square or whatever, about the day, or hear the news of the day.
That would be worth looking into historically, because apparently during the days of telegraph operators like Western Union, like, they had all the insider information. Like, people working at Western Union were the first data collection agencies seeing what the hell was going on in the world first, because their people were sitting there going that, reading all the commerce and business in real time, which eventually got into the public newspapers later, and that could include private stuff too. Like, I'm not sure if telephone operators, your grandma's job down at Bell Telephone in 1940, she talks about, right? What like, I mean, she was listening in on people's stuff too, right? But it wasn't at that scale.
They could have, and in the movies back then too, there was always the sketchy operator that kept listening and didn't hang up the line once she connected it, the parties and whatnot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, eavesdropping is nothing new.
Yeah.
We're just changing how it's done, and we're willingly giving up information. Now, granted, most of the information that we're sharing is really only useful to people that are trying to sell you crap. So,
yeah, true.
Nobody. I don't care about what some guy's sexuality is that lives on the East Coast that I've never met and I'll never see. And
yeah.
Not that I would care if I did really meet him anyway.
Yeah.
But if he's got rainbows all over his profile, and I've got half naked women or something all over mine, that's not a serious thing, right? That's not a serious thing. That's stupid entertainment. So we're talking about Neil Postman and like amusing ourselves to death. He didn't see anything wrong per se with like TV shows, idiotic shows. It's a brain drain. You're not going to really get any smarter by watching that, but sometimes we have to do certain activities to just shut our brains off in our modern times.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It would probably be a lot healthier if you were to go meditate, but realistically, most people don't do this kind of things. The problem is wholly when you try doing something seriously on that level, and that's really where the problems begin. Um, Dumb TV show is fine, but then when you have people screaming at each other, and then you're telling everybody this is how we have our opinions now, and share them with each other, that trickles over into the real world. Monkey see, monkey do. Um, People are not the wholly rational beings that behavioral economists want us to believe that we are, or Ayn Rand capitalists, or Aristotelians, or anything. It's like we're not. There's actually multiple types of rationality. If you get into the literature, there's the rational enough, rationality, where I worked with the information I had and made the best choice at the time based on the information I have. But then there's the real, clinical on top of it, rationality, where the actually Postman talked about it. What is it? Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, where if you're on a date with a woman and you're on a beach watching a gorgeous sunset, and she's like, "Oh, what a beautiful sunset! Isn't this great? I wish we could see a sunset like this every night." And then the guy, totally tapping into his Asperger's response, "Well, actually, the sun never really sets per se. It's the Earth is turning," and it goes into that. He says, like, "Well, if you're lucky enough to get a second date after saying something stupid like that on a date, so it's kind of like that distinction. And then when it comes down to money, people are absolutely irrational. So to expect people to behave rationally all the time when you give them a loaded gun is not reality, right? A lot of people want to say it is, but it's not. It's not. And we've got prisons full of people that made irrational decisions. We've got people in casinos that are making irrational decisions, with their money. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. Free country, right? Where I live, to do these kinds of things. You can make whatever choice you want. You have to pay the price for that choice, but they're not necessarily rational choices. Mm-hmm. Especially when you get into things like addiction, where you're being driven kind of by not an external force, but by a force inside of you that's biological, right? Where you're having to feed kind of your lizard brain is running the show.
Yeah.
All rationality goes out the window, especially with certain types of drugs where you get really disconnected from reality. So having them say, "Oh yeah, we put in this so that way it'll like log you out after half an hour, so you're not spending that much time on there." The first thing people are going to do is either turn it off, or they're going to relog in every 30, and then they'll be annoyed with that at first, and then eventually they'll just get used to it. So people get used to everything. I mean, if you look at the prison camps in North Korea and the conditions that we know that happen there, they just get used to it. Where parents actually will walk away from their own children in order to save themselves. Horrible situations.
Oh my God, yeah, yeah. If there's nothing renewing that sort of human connection or that parental obligation, the whole culture around you is yeah.
Right, we're functioning on a primal level, right? So if to a certain degree we're functioning on a primal level on Twitter, you can't expect good stuff to come out of that. So, and then there's people that will capitalize on that. Donald Trump. So he's not a stupid guy. I'd be like, "Oh, he's dumb." He is not a stupid man. He knew exactly.
Yeah.
Getting on Twitter, saying outrageous things. It's a show. It's a show, but he knew the audience. So, because he learned how to do those things from Roy Cohen and other people, and being on TV and the wrestling thing and all that stuff. And he knows how to get people worked up and reacting to things that he's saying. And they give the guy a lot of shit because somebody said at one point they saw like Hitler's speeches sitting on top of his desk or something like that. Anybody who's ever written a somewhat halfway decent speech has read Hitler's speeches, because Hitler knew how to get people energized. So Goebbels did too, but Goebbels didn't have the charisma. So JFK knew how to give a killer speech. FDR. I mean, we're talking about communications.
Yeah.
So in FDR's time, you had fireside chats over your radio, and you'd be sitting there with your kids and maybe smoking a cigarette, and or the state of the nation, as he spoke to for, I don't know the exact length of time. I've heard snippets, but I never really listened to a lot of those. And then JFK was really the first television president. And so you'd see his face on TV talking to you. And then then you had Ron. Interesting, if you look at progression. You had JFK for TV president. You had a couple kind of stodgy old white guys, like Nixon and Ford and all that. Jimmy Carter was the all shucks guy. But then what happened after that? We had an actor become president, Ronald Reagan, for 8 years. And then after that, his vice president, George Bush. And George Bush, one of the things I remember from a kid, he was giving his State of the Union, and he reached down on his desk and he picked up a bag with a bunch of crack rocks in it, saying how he bought those in the park across the street. Or he didn't buy them, obviously. Somebody went and bought them for the effect of the speech.
Yeah.
Just across the street. And obviously that has big shock value. The president's holding up crack rocks. He's talking about the crack epidemic and all that.
Good showmanship.
Exactly. It's all showmanship, right? It's long gone. Our Abe Lincoln pacing a stage for hours, making sure he answered everybody's questions and everybody kind of knows where he stands and being rhetorical, quoting philosophy, quoting Greeks and Romans and explaining his position on people and they would travel from town to town and do that back then and stand in the town square and talk to everybody. And when they had debates, it was like, okay, you get an hour to talk, and then you get an hour to retort, then you get an hour to talk, and then you can retort to his, and all that.
Yeah.
Now, oh God, presidential debates, forget about it. But it matches the medium. So, what effect does that have on us when you take away technology? Technology is an artificial construct, right? These things that we're creating, these are just things that people have made. If you strip all that away, let's get back to a state of nature, right? So the philosophical state of nature is, we're hunter-gatherers. How do we organize ourselves when there's no real social structure, et cetera? How do we communicate when there's no technology like there is now? And it is that long-form conversation, right? Native Americans, oral traditions, they didn't write anything down. It was your job to memorize word for word what you were told to be able to tell your kids. And so the effect that has on the mind, so where that's natural, those long conversations are natural. The effect it has on the mind to move to these short snippets, it's no wonder we're having so many problems. And a guy like Trump, it's not his fault he got elected. He knew exactly what to give people. He gave people what they wanted, and that's why he won. And he's really representative. He's the forest fire burning the forest now that will eventually leave, burned out trees for things to regrow, unless the person that comes after him is a little, even more bombastic.
Yeah.
But I think that he had to happen to hold up that mirror to society and say, he's saying crazy stuff, but it's like the whole point to our media here in the U.S. and say, well, look, saying, fake news. You guys made all this stuff up. Where's your evidence for it?
Oh, sure.
And then in retort, they attack him. It's he is really a reflection, or he is holding up the mirror of how stupid we've become, let ourselves become, I should say.
Sure. I used to watch The Daily Show during, I guess, the Bush presidency. And then I started watching some MSNBC when we got that cable package. And so I loved watching, like Keith Olbermann's Worst Person in the World, and then Rachel Maddow and all this stuff. Yeah,
I remember
right?
Olbermann. Yeah.
It was great, entertaining TV, kind of like the Daily Show was. Just on it was, however, it felt it was a lot more authoritative, right? But I mean, in retrospect, when you look at how the Tea Party, for instance, was covered as a bunch of nut jobs with tea bags stapled to their hats and whatnot, it's like there probably was some more nuance going on to that, because it's kind of like being cross-eyed. On the other hand, I'm on the internet all the time watching all the Ron Paul fans in like 2017, trying to get this guy all over Dig and all over Reddit and whatnot. And it's like, if you only got your news from the internet, then Ron Paul was like, oh, he's going to blast his way all to the presidency, right?
Yeah.
So it's like these currents of these wholly different media worlds which don't overlap at all. Like they had to collide sooner or later, and Twitter has just ended up being that kind of nexus where the cold front and the warm front are coming together, right?
Right. And there's the and this started with cable news. I think the ideological camps emerged. So you had CNN; they were really early in, not as ideological as they are now, obviously. Fox News came along, obviously with like a right wing slant. For a while, there's that constant between Fox News and MSNBC. So you had Bill O'Reilly, and then side, you had Keith Olbermann, right? Yeah, because he said Bill O'Reilly was the worst person in the world, probably every other episode. I remember Olbermann.
Below the Clown, yeah.
Oh, yeah, gosh, he was so nasty though. But then you did have stuff like the Daily Show, and the Daily Show was smart because they're effectively showing a liberal worldview, but they were using humor to get it through. And a lot of kids grew up watching that. Like, that's where they were getting news. And when I would talk to people, and they would say, "Oh yeah," because people were, I would say, just about as crazed as about George Bush after 9/11 happened and things calmed back down. We were at war, but after things calmed back down, and because the president gets a free pass for a while after something like that happens. After his free pass expired, he was just as attacked, if not, not more so, as Trump. And all personal attacks. I mean, it wasn't necessarily about. I mean, there were attack choices, certain things, but usually it was look how stupid this guy is. Can you believe he's president? He's so dumb, and all the same stuff that we're seeing now. And then that really, I think, was when we started seeing, because on the internet, still early days of the internet.
Yeah.
The camps start moving apart too. Daily Cause came about. So the hard lefties were over at the Daily Cause, talking trash about Bush all day long. And then you had Little Green Footballs, I think was the right wing, one of the bigger right wing sites at the time. And people just started breaking off into these factions and staying in their little areas. But then social media came, and all those people came back onto that social media platform, and now they're screaming at each other there too. Mm-hmm. Even though they still have those other sites.
And I mean, yeah. So the fact that all this technology came up in parallel to these political shifts, where you go from George W. Bush, you go into Obama, which is just such an amazing relief from 8 years of George W. Bush. Finally, a Democrat back in the office. Finally, we don't have to rail against the administration and for all of its stupidity, right? Like this 8-year celebration of,
right.
Just as social media bloomed and spread everywhere, sort of created this false image of social media as being this great utopian thing where, bad shit's not really happening and all the conservatives are, demoralized and they're not, and so now it's...
Yeah, and he was the first one to really get on social media.
Mm-hmm.
The
term...
Bush wasn't.
Yeah, in Paul Levinson's New Media, he says he calls Obama the first internet president, but he's cybergenic is the term he quotes from someone else.
Mm.
Right.
Like, he appeals. Yeah, internet appeal. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So and he knows, and he knew that, because if you look at so since we're kind of talking a little bit about the overlap with the expectation of somebody having a certain level of celebrity due to the cultural shifts caused by social media. Bill Clinton took advantage of the talk show circuit, late night shows, all that stuff.
Arsenio.
Exactly, yeah. Arsenio, saxophone and sunglasses.
Yeah.
And then we had Bush, obviously. Not as much on that. He was more. Yeah, he would do the circuit, but he wasn't, really out there being the celebrity. And then Obama, again, back to being the celebrity. Democrats are obviously, pretty good at that because they're have more mass appeal and shows. Entertainment generally has a left-wing slant, unless you're watching something on like Fox News.
Yeah.
So it lends itself more to the Democrats. But yeah, like you say, cybergenic, that's a great term. That term used with him. But if you look historically at how the U.S. has elected their presidents, we elected either people who had been governors or had some other kind of executive experience. We really didn't have a long track senators, because it's like, well, what if you run? All you do is vote. You don't actually run if you're a senator. Although we had some senators, but we always like to see people that had that executive experience. Mm-hmm. And then and I'm speaking of the testament of the internet. Obama came along. He was a junior senator from Illinois, no executive experience. He taught law school for a little while. Was a senator for a little while. Abstained, I think, on just a large number of votes. Mm-hmm. So really, it was just kind of easing his way in really to national politics. But then all the hype happened, and the combination of the social media support, him being cybergenic, the fact he was black. I mean,
yeah, sure.
That's huge factor in his election. Everybody wanted a first black president. And it's like, well, okay, seems like a good guy. Look at he's smart guy. He was a senator. Mm-hmm. He obviously has his shit together, and and all that, and then he got a free pass for 8 years. I'm doing a bunch of, and then now this other guy comes along, and then all that horrible shit is still happening. It's just they're pointing it out again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting. But
And
what
this-
I've really seen, there's always been factions in politics, but there's an additional intensity around that faction now. Because before it was like one faction would go talk to the other faction, and maybe they hate each other or whatever, but they would try to work through and come to some kind of solution. Starting with in recent history, probably around the time the Tea Party really started to emerge, that kind of ceased. It was like, no, we're doing what we're doing, and we're going to figure out how to get you the hell out of our way.
Yeah.
And then you see that now, especially in Trump's presidency, where they're like, we need to figure out how to get this guy impeached. Not your team lost, and in 4 years from now you get another shot, and then another 4 years after that you get another, et cetera, et cetera. Like no, it's absolutely intolerable. We can't be in charge right now, so we're going to get hysterical and do everything that we can to try to get back in charge.
Yeah.
Even if it's fabricate a bunch of stuff and all that.
Yeah, and I think that's just a naive obliviousness to this media stratification. Because, for instance, as you said, like, Obama was a wartime president, I think, right? There were still wars going on, and there were still atrocities going on under his thing, right? And anybody who read a newspaper, or anybody who actively went out of their way to follow news, might have a very nuanced or sometimes critical view of Obama. But if you're only watching television, right, in the sphere of people and discourse who only get their stuff from, sound bites and television news, they're living in one world. And then everyone who goes out of their way to find information and read long, boring articles in pieces of paper magazine, or just, spend lots of time going back and forth between the bubbles on the internet, which is hard. It's hard to go find conservative voices and then go find liberal voices and then force yourself to put up with the crap you can't agree with until you finally understand and build some sort of, So people who don't take the effort, those are the pawns who are subject to the most ludicrous, messaging now, which is all like the most like nonsensical short soundbite. It's all about optics and everything, and lots of other people are just not falling for it anymore. And so it is about and it is about different people living in different media environments who don't.
Well, certain people aren't falling for it anymore. So, generally speaking, voters are idiots, and I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean that's the case, right? So when you see somebody like Hillary Clinton, if you have half of a brain in your head, and you see Hillary Clinton, and you're like, that smile's pretty fake. She's always, how's it go? Just the whole shtick. I think to people who are self-aware and prefer genuine connections with other people, look at that, maybe turn your stomach a little. But there's a reason that they do that. And it's because it works for most people.
Yeah.
It works, or I should say, it works on most people. That the bullshit of politics works on most people, and the people that are actively voting are the people that it works on. And those are the people that we might not necessarily want to be the ones actively. We want to have actively voting. Say they just throw their hands up and they're, I'm washing my hands of this thing. I don't want anything to do with this. Everybody's crazy. I'm out of here. And those are the people that actually probably should be voting for people, and then we would have better people in office. But all of this is representative changes in the communication mediums, bringing it back to social media. When especially when you get into the realm of strategic communication on social media. You saw in the 2016 election people pushing propaganda, whether true or not, it's still propaganda, about Hillary has a health problem. What's going on with that? How come she's falling downstairs and these other things. And then even after the election, she had this weird back brace thing that she kept hiding. And the way that she was hiding it was ridiculous. It was the equivalent of, I don't know if you have done from like the late 80s, early 90s, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Say it again.
Dunkin' Donuts ads from the late 80s and early 90s. Okay, so it was this fat guy with a mustache that would wake up at the crack of dawn. This is how the setup for the commercial was. And drink his coffee, get his eyes open, and say, "Oh, time to go make the donuts." And then he would go into Dunkin' Donuts, and the shtick was that he would do it so early before anybody else was up. But the other part of the shtick was he was always trying to trick people into thinking that he was somebody he wasn't, And so he had this big mustache. So they would do stuff like they would put the guy in a dress, and then he would put the finger over his mustache so you couldn't see it, and then talk in a falsetto voice. Oh, hello, and like it's literally the equivalent of that. Like that was the amount of effort she was putting into hiding this thing, because as long as no message got out that the media grabbed onto and kept banging the drum on through a couple of news cycles, people would see it and just move on to the next thing, because our brains have been trained to react like that. And we might be like, oh yeah, that's kind of weird, but then the next time we see Hillary, if we like Hillary, she might be talking about how she's going to save children in Africa or something like that, and then you're like, oh yeah, great, and you forget all about the
oh sure that's it. And the people with memories who keep bringing up old tired news are just beating a dead horse. Like any complaints about anything Trump's ever done wrong, right? That's just, that's ancient history. And anything Hillary, right? Benghazi, what? You're still talking about Benghazi? Like, what's wrong?
Right, yeah.
Right? Like, didn't you see that all the pundits on television decided that it was a non-issue like 8 months ago, right? Like,
right. Aren't you keeping up with what you're being told?
Yeah, yeah, right. So that's interesting. It's just the way that social media has allowed people to break through, and then people complaining about getting burned out, and then this return of long form discussions as well. It's sort of this whole intellectual dark web thing, or right? You got Joe Rogan's like the peak of it right now, which is amazing. That's the fear factor for that is probably well.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that? Yeah, the fear factor guy would end up being. I'm not going to call him an intellectual, but would be one of the driving forces in intellectual conversation.
He's down to earth, and he can have an intellectual conversation, right? Like,
he can absolutely. And he's an intellectual in a sense, but not in the traditional sense that I think intellectuals. And then even a guy like Jordan Peterson, huge, and everybody refers to as an intellectual. I still don't think of him as a public intellectual in the true sense, right? Not in the William F. Buckleys or the Gore Vidals or the Christopher Hitchens. We're talking about different caliber, but if that's the best that we have, then I'll take it. Let's make sure that there's still voices out there having conversations.
He's a guy sucked into a vacuum. There was such a need for someone to have any rational thing whatsoever that as the first guy who comes along is just sucked right up.
He just wanted to teach college. And not get forced to use certain words, and they had to go get in his. He effectively put on a reluctantly put on a cape, if you want to look at it that way, and maybe reluctantly self-sacrificed himself to get in the public eye.
So there you go. We moved from the radio presidents like FDR, and you get television. So and then you get to Reagan, and then you get Obama. It's sort of like how movie genres turn, from serious into more reflexive and self-parodying, and then you get Blazing Saddles, and then no one watches it anymore, right? It's that sort of evolution going on. You end up with Trump today, and it's like, okay, we got nowhere to go from here after this. It's not.
Trump is Spaceballs. Trump is Network. Trump is, all that.
Idiocracy. Like, sure, yeah, I guess not a bad.
So, and at the end of the day, I kind of look at it. Through I guess an Odd Postman-esque lens that the stuff and obviously his detractors wouldn't agree with this, but they can't see the forest for the trees. The substance of his presidency isn't controversial at all. There's nothing that he's done that is controversial and that hasn't already been done by presidents in the recent past. Not like 1930s putting Japanese in internment camps, but in the recent past. But they're trying to manufacture controversy where none exists. It's the fact that he was able to get through the system because he worked it better than anybody else, and he was able to get himself into the system. I think everybody's just pissed off about that, and I think that they're also scared because he is an outsider, and that's threatening because the system is always really well controlled in the States. There's a reason that there's only ever been two parties, really once part. I mean, there were multiple parties, but that the two parties figured out how to make sure that moving forward, it's just two parties.
Well, that's necessary for stability, for future forecasting, everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And when trends change and the fringe parties emerge, the Ron Pauls and the parties and all that, what you start seeing is the existing parties, they'll watch and they'll wait their time, and they'll see what issues wind up becoming most important to the base, and then they absorb those issues into their party, and along with that, they get the voters.
We'll probably see that happening. All right, thanks for joining me, Donald. We're out of time.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll dig into much more of these topics on the next episode of Life in the Foam. Bye, guys.